We go through a life not remembering who we are, what our past was, where we came from. But with an avatar, there's always the consciousness of why they had come down and who they truly are. And this was Sita's now coming of age. She's not yet married. Her coming into her own power in a way. Sita is not represented that way in the Kama narrative. She is Narayani. She is the absolute, the full Shakti coming into a human form. She goes into very high states and is able to lift the sages. The sages in her presence had realizations that they had not reached on their own. Janak Baba, the great Janak Baba, says that he reached levels of realization in her presence, being with her in that state of high samadhi that he had not reached before. I'm invoking the presence of Sita Ma so that we can all feel her presence as we go into the discussion of Sita. This morning will be devoted to her. The question came up yesterday as what was the archetype of Sita that was relevant for us today? And we're going to get into discussing that. But why is this so important? The story of Ram and Sita are foundational, and not just for India. I had organized a gathering in Costa Rica a little bit before COVID, and a man came up to me and told me that he was building a temple in Costa Rica. He was a Costa Rican man for Ram and Sita, and I said, well, how did you know about them? He said he found a small murti of Ram in the field, and he knew to build the temple there. And as we'll see in part of, I will do some reading today, Ram and Sita traveled all over the earth. They touched every part of the earth when they were here. And so their energy is in every part of the earth. But the story has been told in many ways over the millennia. And unfortunately, in the telling of it, Sita came to be seen as a victim, as the unfortunate victim. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sita was the designer. It was her who created her story. She was in total control of the whole narrative and chose to go into Lanka because Ravana was their devotee, their beloved devotee who had fallen. How could she not go in and do the work that she needed to do, the internal work, which is the work of Shakti? Ram did the external and she did the internal. And there are many chapters in here that talk about her work on his psyche when she was in Lanka. She was doing the internal work with him so that they could liberate him from that illusion. But I want to read just different sections from the book that reveal something about who she was, why she came, and then move into her work today in the world, because Ram and Sita are very active in the world today. So I'm going to start with a story as Sita was coming into womanhood. Maybe she was 14 or 15. And there was an attendant, one of her celestial attendants, who took birth to serve her. That attendant's name was Soma, and Soma came around this time, and she was totally in tune with Sita. The only purpose was to serve Sita, and so she was by her side all the time. So I'll read a little section of this. This story is told through the voice of a servant named Meenakshi, who was born in the household. Her father had served in the household, the grandfather had served in the household, and she was just a servant there, but had been taken in now to watch over Sita. She describes Sita as Sita's coming into womanhood. A beautiful form, a brilliant mind, and a most tender heart. Yet Mata, they called her Mata even from birth, seemed oblivious or uncaring of her qualities. Her dress was simple, her speech was humble, Her love was for the freedom of the forest, to wander at will, to observe the bountiful manifestations of nature, and to love and enjoy them all. A few years after Soma's arrival, Mata began to spend more and more time alone, wandering off into the forest while we were all engaged in other activities. When it would come to our attention that she was nowhere to be found, I would get anxious. Soma always reassured me and would go herself into the forest to find her. On one such occasion, Sunenama, Sita's mother, had been looking for Sita but couldn't find her. She approached me to inquire about her, but I only shook my head. "I've not seen Sita since last evening," I replied. Looking uneasy, she murmured, "Irmila also has not seen her, and she did not show up for the morning meal. She has been gone a long time." Then Sunenama inquired of Soma, who responded as I did, but added, "I think I might know where she is." I glanced at Soma, knowing what she meant. When Sita wanted to walk in the forest, to experience its beauty, and to be with the animals, she would not go alone. She would always invite her sister or her cousins and one of the servants. But when she wanted to commune with the deities in meditation, she would often slip away before any of us noticed. "I believe she left for the forest alone very early this morning," Soma replied quietly. "I will try to bring her back." "Please, Soma, go quickly and ask her to return to the palace," requested Sunenama. "A number of sages are coming tonight, including Sage Gargi, and I know Sita will want to serve them their meal and sit with them this evening. She must get ready." The sun had already passed the midway point in the sky, and there were not many hours left of daylight. The sages would soon arrive, and Sita always insisted on serving them herself. Soma left, and I waited anxiously. Not long after this conversation, Sunenama sought me out and asked if Soma and Sita had arrived. I shook my head. "What could have happened?" she mused. I could see that she was concerned and so hurried to assure her. "I will go and see what has kept them, perhaps an animal in need." Sunenama nodded her head. We all knew of Sita's care for the animals. If there had been an injury or an attack on an animal, Sita would attend to it and not leave until she had done what she could. "Yes, go, Meenakshi, and tell them to hurry back." It had been some years since I had frequented the forest, as it was usually Soma who now accompanied Mata on her walks. So I cautiously entered the thicket of trees and followed the narrow path. I called out to them, at first in a quiet voice, and then more forcefully, "Soma, Mata." There was no answer. I continued to call out as I entered more deeply into the groves. Finally, I saw the figure of Soma approaching. She was alone. "Where is Mata?" I asked in alarm. "Sunenama has sent me to find you both." The smile that always adorned Soma's face was gone. In its place was an expression of concern. Her face was pale, and her voice vibrated with a slight quiver as she replied, "She's deep in meditation. I think she has entered a very high state, and I cannot bring her back. She has not moved since I arrived and sits there as still as a rock. Hurry back and ask Janak Baba to come and bring water and some fruits for when she returns to waking consciousness." Without a word, I turned around and ran as fast as I could over the rock-strewn path, making my way through bramble and heavily wooded growth. As I neared the edge of the forest, something caught my clothing, and before I could prevent it, I fell to the ground and twisted my ankle. Tears filled my eyes. I could not stop now. I had to get to the Maharaja. "Mata, give me the strength to carry on," I prayed, as I forced myself to my feet and with much difficulty made my way to the palace. There I entered Kiran, leaving the kitchen area. Kiran looked after the animals. "What happened, Meenakshi?" he asked in a concerned voice. "Why are you limping? Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "I must find Janak Baba. Do you know where he is?" "In the stateroom with his guests. They have all arrived. They are ready for the evening meal, but everyone is waiting for Mata." He paused and then glanced down at my leg. "But what is wrong with your foot? You are limping. I can get one of the servants to go to Janak Baba if you need him." "No, no," I hurried to reply. "I'm fine, really, but I must go." Taking my leave, I did my best to hobble to the stateroom. I heard their voices as I approached, but as I reached the doorway, I stopped. Never before had I entered that room without being called there. It would be presumptuous of me to enter, but Janak Baba was needed. What was I to do? I retreated a few steps, undecided, when I heard him call me to enter. I tried to steady my steps as I entered the room and offered pranam to Janak Baba and the gathered sages. "What has happened to you, Meenakshi? Why are you limping?" he asked. "It is nothing," I replied in barely more than a whisper. "Soma has sent me to request your presence. She is with Sita Rajkumari in the forest and says it is urgent that you come." "Is anything wrong?" he asked in a voice of concern. "I don't know. She says it is urgent." Janak Baba closed his eyes and stayed this way for several minutes. Then opening his eyes, he murmured, "It is what I thought. I have long been afraid of the day when she would remember where she came from." As Janak Baba excused himself from the assembled sages, Sage Gargi asked if she could accompany him. He nodded and called for Usha. He instructed her to take care of serving the evening meal. Then Janak Baba asked 4 guards to fire the torches to light the way as darkness had already set in. As best I could, I hobbled off to gather a few fruits in a basket and fill a small jug of water. My ankle was now throbbing. With great pain, I led them to where I had met Soma. She was not there, but when I called out to her, she emerged and guided us to where Sita was seated in an immobile position, locked in a lotus flower, like a lotus flower in an utterly still pond, showing not the slightest flutter of life. I had never seen her like this, and my heart pounded at the thought that she may have left us. A cry escaped from my lips, but Soma put her hand on my arm to still me. "There is no breath in her," murmured Soma to Janak Baba. "I arrived just after midday, but she has been missing since early morning, and I suspect has been like this since then." Soma and I retreated a short distance as Janak Baba uttered a mantra and entered meditation. Sage Gargi began to chant Vedic hymns. Several hours passed with him in silent meditation and Sage Gargi chanting. Finally, Janak Baba rose and asked me to bring all the sages. "I cannot bring her back, but perhaps collectively we can entreat her to return," he said solemnly. As Soma saw my condition, she asked me to stay put. She took 2 of the guards to light the way and returned to the palace. The sages knew nothing of what had transpired and thought it very strange that the Maharaja had disappeared so suddenly, with no explanation, and had still not returned. It was getting late, and they were eager to retire. They were not pleased with the situation. But when Soma arrived and explained in a sorrowful voice that due to Sita's condition, the Maharaja was requesting them to come to the forest and hold their discussions there in her presence, they all nodded, saying they were eager to be of assistance. Soma added, "The Maharaja is hoping that your presence will help bring our beloved Rajkumari back to us." She led them into the forest where Janak Baba and Sage Gargi were meditating by Sita's side. Some of the servants accompanied them, bringing cushions and torches. The 6 sages made a semicircle around Sita and began chanting Vedic invocations. They meditated, then discussed their perceptions, followed by more meditation and more discussion. At one point, Janak Baba stopped participating and entered what appeared to be the same state as Sita. He sat there still as a rock without any movement and seemingly without any breath. And so the night passed. Leaning against a tree, I drifted into a semi-sleep state. But as the night wore on, the pain in my foot increased until I could no longer find a comfortable position. Soma saw me squirming and realized that I'd hurt myself quite badly. Searching for something to wrap around my foot, she finally tore a part of her shawl and, despite my protestations, bandaged my leg. This eased the pain, enough for me to drift off into a shallow sleep. At the first rays of dawn, the chanting began again, mingling with the chatter of the assembly of birds. And together they made a most beautiful symphony of sounds. My eyes opened to an almost unearthly scene. The greenery of the forest glittered ever so gently in the early rays of dawn. A soft hue had settled over the forest floor. Many small animals had come close to us in the night to observe this most unusual gathering. It appeared as if we had all awakened to another world, more beautiful even than our earth, if that was possible. My eyes went first to Sita, hoping that she'd return to the world, but she remained locked in the meditation pose. And Janak Baba was still in meditation as well. The chanting went on for some time, and when it ceased, the sages began discussing the nature of what they had experienced the night before. One of the sages remarked that he had entered a state he had never previously experienced. Another concurred. It was then that I saw Janak Baba slowly open his eyes. A look of radiant joy painted across his face. He listened quietly as the sages continued to comment on the nature of their experiences. Suddenly, I saw a movement. Mata had shifted her position ever so slightly. Everyone seemed to catch the subtle movement of her hands, and the sages fell silent with all eyes turned to her. She didn't stir again for some time, but finally her eyes cracked open. The first one she saw was Janak Baba, and she smiled, opening her eyes wider, her face exuding such love. "Pitaji," she whispered, "you have come." He also hadn't spoken until that moment, but he nodded and said very slowly, "We are all here, Sita. You could not come to us, so we came to you to share in your ecstasy." Sita looked around and seemed surprised to see us all gathered, not quite grasping what had happened. And so Janak Baba continued, "You came here early yesterday morning and went into deep meditation. Soma could not bring you back, nor could I. So I brought the sages who had come yesterday to the spot where you are." For some time, everyone sat in silence, as if still enjoying their inner experience. And then Mata noticed the basket of fruits and the pitcher of water before her. Asking the sages to excuse her for not serving them the evening meal last night, she slowly rose and gave each one a piece of fruit and some water. Then Janak Baba asked the guards to guide everyone back to the palace for the morning meal. "I will join you shortly," he said. As I rose to leave, I quietly winced in pain. Mata noticed this and asked me to stay behind with Soma, saying that she would apply some medicine. When the others had left, Baba asked very gently, "Where had you gone, my daughter? I could not find you anywhere in the ethers." She replied simply, "To him." "To whom?" he asked. "To the one I will marry. It was he who brought me back. When he uttered the words, 'Soon we will be reunited,' this body came alive again. Had he not arrived, I would have merged into the great ocean of being." "I will be ever grateful to him for bringing you back to this world," Baba replied with deep emotion. "I was afraid you would disappear into the absolute, and my Sita would be with us no more. I am not yet ready for that." Sita smiled. "You know I would not leave without first taking your permission. You who have called me into this world will be the one to release me." This was the promise Sita made to her father that day in the forest. Janak Baba smiled. "Let us go have some food with our guests." You go ahead, Pitaji. I must first attend to Meenakshi's wounded ankle. As he rose to leave, he added with a knowing smile, I see you also dove, she added with a knowing smile, I see you also dove into that blissful sea. He offered pranam and replied very solemnly, no sage has been able to transmit the experience that I received in your presence last night. If you were not my daughter, I would. Pitaji, say no more, she replied, gazing lovingly at him. What came to you last night was the result of your many years of effort. Janak Baba seemed reluctant to leave her, but Mata laughed and said, don't worry, Pitaji. I have given you my word. I will not disappear from here. I will go see to our guest then, but do not stay long. Your mother, I know, is very eager for you. Once he was gone, Mata directed Soma down a nearby path and described in detail the plant that she would find. Then she reached over to unwrap the bandage that Soma had improvised. I instinctively tried to withdraw my leg, but Mata would not let it go. Please, Mata, it is nothing really. I just need to rest a bit longer. You have been resting all night and look at the swelling. The medicine will help. My ankle was now twice its normal size and the throbbing was relentless. It was difficult to keep the tears from welling up. I am your servant, Mata, please, I murmured quietly, trying again to withdraw my leg. Holding on to my leg, she touched the swollen ankle very gently and said, and I am the servant of the world, Meenakshi. How can I not take care of your wound when I have the means? That scene is one of my favorites. And I want to ask you, can you think of why that scene is such a powerful one? Any thoughts about that scene?
Could it be that there is that moment of remembrance of it's almost like a twin flame, right? That there is another half that we are a part of. And in that moment, she went and met Ram in the subtle plane. And when those two come together, there's such bliss, such joy. It's almost as if it's a samadhi state in common parlance. And you don't necessarily want to come back out of that because it's such a joyful state.
Well, they say when an avatar takes embodiment, a thin veil comes over even them. Just having a physical form, there has to be a thin veil. But still, the veil is very thin. It's not like with us where the veil is thicker, where we go through a life not remembering who we are, what our past was, where we came from. But with an avatar, there's always the consciousness of why they had come down and who they truly are. And this was Sita's now coming of age. She's not yet married. Her coming into her own power in a way. Sita is not represented that way in the common narrative. She is Narayani. She is the absolute, the full Shakti coming into a human form. She goes into very high states and is able to lift the sages. The sages in her presence had realizations that they had not reached on their own. Janak Baba, the great Janak Baba, says that he reached levels of realization in her presence, being with her in that state of high samadhi that he had not reached before. That's one aspect of it. But there's another aspect of it that's so touching for me. Can you imagine? Can you think what it is? What does Sita do the moment she comes down into her body? What is the first thing she does? She feeds the sages. The first thing is, oh, there's fruit, there's water, she feeds them. And we see that throughout the narrative of Sita, is that she's a complete servant of the world. And the next thing she does is tend to her servant. And one of the most touching things about this for me is this was a time, Treta Yuga, before class divisions. Yes, everybody had a different role, but there was full dignity. I mean, we see in Meenakshi's father, who was a servant in the household, that role is such a dignified one for him. There's no dispersion, there's no degrading of different roles. To be a servant is a dignified thing. Sita sees herself as a servant. And that gets lost in time, the dignity of every single person, the dignity of every role in society. We've completely lost that in the modern world. We have a higher and a lower, and everything is judged that way. But it's helpful for us to go back. I mean, as I was writing this, I really found myself back in the consciousness of the Treta Yuga and was able to remember how things were before the decline in spiritual consciousness. And that's very touching for me to see Sita's care for every animal, for every plant, for every human being. And that was the way life was lived at that time. Now, there are many other stories in there of how Sita worked with the animal kingdom and how she worked with the plants. I'll read another episode. Is there anybody want to discuss this or comment?
As you say that she comes out of Samadhi with immediate action to serve the world. I see it also as a significance to what we talked about yesterday, how we are now at the point of serving the world to regenerate the world, to regenerate the soul. I'm talking from my own experience and my own work that I do in regeneration as an expert, whatever, sustainability. Is that the message of untold story of Sita is the message to today's world for creating the future, where I see mostly in all of the world where I work is mostly women. When I go to workshops of any civil society, any activism is mostly women. When you go to the business sector and entrepreneurship and corporate sector, in terms of any action, it's mostly men. So my question is, how do we engage men to open up to this service to the world and the regeneration? It's one question. And the second one is, you talked about dystopian future. And whenever I talk about it, my messages in my lectures is always futures of hope. I do my work in my place and through my education. And I'm always told that I'm utopian. So then I recognize within me very strong frustration with the so-called relative reality as you described it, where I see so many hopeless situations of the corporate takeover, of so much injustice, of so much power, especially in terms of the money and the capital that takes over the world. And so here I am, a tiny little professor, whatever, doing my little work in my place. How can I create this hopeful regenerative future in the face of Elon Musk and Bridges and all the guys?
I no longer do the interfaith work. Everybody caught on. It's okay, we need a few women here. And then I said, it's not enough to have a few women. Are women shaping the dialogue? Are women leading? It's not enough to put a few women here and there and put one woman. I would often find myself on a panel of 5 people and I was the only woman. It's like, okay, I would say, I'm representing half the human race. Well, that's not fair. You know, it took a long time to even get that acknowledgement, oh, we need a woman there, just to be politically correct. Then the question is, we're not shaping the narrative. We're not shaping the economic system. We're not shaping the political system or the religious system. We're just now present. We've managed to be present, but we're not shaping the. Yes, yeah. And then I've realized that this is a long-term effort. And in one life, you achieve a little bit. And that's why we have to stretch out time and not think of just one life. Think of this as a long-term effort. And that could be frustrating because there's so many areas that need to change. And that's why I've shifted my vision from the past to the future, because we have to create the future. We have to when I meet with young people, and a lot of the work of my organization is with young people in their 30s early 40s, late 20s, and I say to them, you have to have a visioning exercise. You have to create a vision. What is the world you want to work for? What does that look like? If we don't have any idea of what it looks like, how can we create it? I mean, in this system of creation, things take place first in the thought realm, in the ideational world, in the causal realm, before they manifest physically. Once we know that, we can work at that thought realm and begin to create new structures, at least first in thought and then in language, and writing it down and describing it. And eventually it will manifest. And it's a struggle. I mean, it's part of the evolutionary leap that humanity is making now. You know, I mean, you can see a lot of the changes in society, the fact that meditation, spiritual practices, mainstream, the fact that women are more visible. We used to be completely invisible. But you can see that the mindsets have not really changed. The economic system is based on an old mindset of hierarchy and of dominance. I call it the domination gene. The political system, the governance system, everything is still based on one group dominating another. And that's an old mentality, a Kali Yuga mentality that we have not outgrown. And so that could take a few hundred years. It could take a few decades or a few hundred years, depending on how large our collective is, you know? It's like the 100th monkey, you know? The larger our collective, the more quickly we can move into new systems. And we're particularly looking for young people who are thinking out of the box and are thinking of new systems. Because they, you know, how they have new tools now and they see what's crumbling. So there was a wonderful Buddhist teacher, Joanna Macy. Who, yeah, and she said something. She's one of the greats. She said something years ago that affected me. She said, "You can focus on breaking down what's not working, or you can focus on building up the new, the creation, the destruction of the creation. You choose where to put your energy." And I see people who are really overcome with frustration will focus on breaking down the old systems. But those of us who recognize the creative power we have should put our energy into imagining new systems, creating new systems, knowing that they will manifest in the future.
I think probably all of us want to make the world a better place, and we get overwhelmed and like not knowing where to start and what to do. And we just came from another ashram with a guru. We would have satsang with him, and he had a way of simplifying everything.
I couldn't get that.
He had a way of simplifying everything to make side top.
He had a way of simplifying.
Okay, yeah, simplifying everything. So like, because we want to help and it seems overwhelming, and so what to do? And like what I gathered from it was that we don't have to do it. We don't have to do it like our individual self, but more that there's divine assistance, that if we attune or meditate or get in touch with that energy, then we sort of know the next steps to take. And so it feels a little less like almost like aligning with divine plan. So it just simplifies, and maybe like the concept of doing our dharma, and that the divine has a plan for us, and we don't have to like push and strive, because like that's the masculine way, you know, where like if we can align with the divine energies and manifest what the plan is already there. Yeah.
I think the more of us who are able to stay in a place of love,
Yeah.
and it's very easy to get angry and frustrated, but that's adding to the collective. There's a lot of anger in the collective right now. There's a lot of fear in the collective that's erupting in various places, and how we balance that out with being in a place of love. I mean, I agree with you. There's nothing we have to do per se, except to do what we're guided to do. If we're guided to work here, we do that. And in a way, surrendering the fruits of our action. That's one of the main teachings of the Gita. is to surrender the fruits of the action. We do what we do to serve and leave the rest in the divine hands. And I think that's something that we constantly need to remind ourselves of, about not being attached to the fruits of our actions, because we want certain outcomes. But knowing that evolution is happening, we're on an upward movement, things are going to change. We don't know the time frame. But the more love we add to the collective, and the more we attune ourselves. I mean, that's why I keep writing and reading, to keep myself at that level where I'm in tune with these divine beings. Yeah.
It reminded me of what Charles Eisenstein says, that because he was also frustrated with how things are, but he said he's learned to think in terms of 500 years. Otherwise, he was getting too upset. And he said, everything is broken, everything. It's not something that we can fix in 10 or 20 years. So he thinks in terms of 500 years, and he says to be sure to make time to visit your grandmother and all of these loving acts, small loving acts.
So speaking of the same subject. So I've been reflecting a lot in my life what my responsibility is as a human being living in these times, and how to balance the spiritual work, the inner work, with understanding my outer work. And what I see is that many people in politics or social action, the spiritual parts may be a bit unprioritized, and then we see people in the spiritual world over prioritizing maybe the spiritual parts and not the outer work. So just curious to hear a bit your thoughts on the responsibility we have as a human being, and especially in these times of breakdown, and how to balance these two poles.
That's a key question. And I mean, to me, this is what that story that I read. I mean, Sita went way up into the ultimate reality, but she came back. And the first thing she did was took care of the matters that needed to be taken care of in that moment. Minor things, you feed people, you heal a wound. And one of the things I've learned from Sita, because she's my teacher, is to take care of what needs to be taken care of in your locality, in the moment. In other words, to be attentive, to be mindful of what needs to be done in the moment. And they could be small things and they could be big things. But that's a challenge, because it's very easy for us to get lost in our own world. I've seen many people on the spiritual path get completely cut off from what's going on out there, and they get lost in their own world. And it's okay, I don't want to judge if that's where they are, but that's not the guidance that we receive. The guidance is that our spiritual gifts are meant to benefit everybody. Our spiritual gifts are not meant to be held, they're meant to flow out through us into the world, through personal contacts, through the way we deal with our children and our spouses and our parents and day-to-day contacts, very real things. And it's very easy not to pay attention to those. And I've seen people, on the spiritual path who have practices who are treating other people in a very nasty way. And it's not being mindful, not being conscious of our actions. And, I think that's part of the teachings of all the spiritual texts, the Gita and everything. And that's what I've learned from Sita, is to be mindful and to serve. Sita says, I'm the servant of the world. We're all servants of the world. And we need to see ourselves because who are we? I mean, we also are part of the divine. We have a divine nature. But we've come into this world to awaken, and part of the awakening is to see how much that we can serve the whole creation in small ways. It doesn't have to be vast movements. A small act can have a great effect. And that's something I've learned over the years. Of course, when you're younger, you want to do big actions. But see the impact. For me in my life, it was making peace with my mother. I had a difficult relationship with her. I spent years and years And before she passed away last year, we came to a beautiful place together. That was a huge achievement for me. It was such an important thing because I had neglected that relationship and I took it very personally. We had a lot of issues around my spiritual practice, and I was able to overcome my own reactions. And I think we all know in our life what the difficult relationships are, where we need to heal. We all have something, somebody, some relationship, something that we have to heal. And those small acts are really important, really important. And in terms of not getting discouraged by the state of the world, well, that takes constant work because it's so easy to get discouraged.
I wanted to share with you something I talked to Swamiji Brandev. I've had, like, for me, motherhood has been very challenging. And since I first became mom, there's where my spiritual path began. So I asked Swami, first I asked him how I could, like, not react, and because my big kid is, we have a very hard relationship, and it's not very harmonic relationship. So I first asked him how I could, like, relate to him, and then I asked him about meditation, if there was any mantra or how I could go deeper into meditation, and
Dogs fighting.
and his answer was, which relates to what we're talking, is don't meditate by yourself. Just hold your children, give them a piece of chocolate, and eat it in silence. 2 minutes. That's your meditation, because you need to make pieces with motherhood. And that's your meditation. It's not going yourself into a deep meditation. You just need that to work out that relationship. So that relates what we're talking about we are parents, children, we have relationships. So that for me was a very nice message of everything I've been doing. It's to work towards improving my relationship with my kids. So I really like the simple way he puts it, because he's like, just eat chocolate, 2 minutes, silent. That's your meditation. So I wanted to share with you.
That's beautiful. And I think when there's a troubled relationship like that, I also went through a few years of difficulty with I have two sons, with my younger son. And I said to myself, I've been given an opportunity to develop unconditional love. In other words, I have no expectations from this child. If this child never calls me, that's okay. If this child has to pull away from me for a while, that's okay. And this child did pull away from me, and he needed that, and then he came back after I had come to this realization that this was an opportunity for me to develop unconditional love, that I loved this child no matter what, no matter how he treated me, no matter what, I loved this child. And so I think, every difficult situation we have is an opportunity to come to a higher plane, to look to really internalize the teaching. Every opportunity. I realized that with my difficult relationship with my mother. Again, I was given an opportunity to develop unconditional love. It took me many years to get to that place, but I eventually did, and I was so grateful that I didn't have to redo it sometime in the future. Because if you don't resolve something now, you get another opportunity. So better to do the work now than have to repeat it. And so that's a blessing. And so eat chocolate together. And maybe after, a while of eating chocolate together, something else will happen. I think it's having patience. I mean, patience is a quality. We can't really progress spiritually without patience, because, things, even sitting in meditation, you can sit years in meditation before you come to new realizations. And if you don't have the patience, so you say, oh, well, this is not working. I'm sitting here, nothing's happening. You get up and leave. Well, it's that then nothing is going to happen. So having patience and commitment to stick with it is true of everything in life. Meditation, relationships, everything in life.
Thank you so much. I'm so enjoying this with you, and um, this understanding of not being in victimhood and moving into empowerment through the lens of Sita is so powerful. I wanted just to say that. And then the question I think for me is, oh, by the way, I got a photo from my kids this morning because I left them alone. I just left them alone. And then when they were together, they sent it, right, without me kind of pushing for it. So it seems to me that there's been a process of that para level of bhavana for you. I don't know what you would call it, but through the lens of what I've learned, that you reach that state where that clear channel is coming through you. Would you speak about how that happens?
So I can't explain how what happens happens. I've been a meditator for a long time, and for me, since I was 20, I took it very seriously. That's my lineage is serious meditation. And so it's every day, and for many years I did it and didn't feel a whole lot of change. I mean, I definitely felt more peaceful, more calm. I could deal with situations better. And then at a certain point, I started having memories of the past, which was my first book, My Journey Through Time. I wrote about it. It clarified so much for me. And not only that, I began to see the patterns of karma, how it's really one life, but you get many different opportunities to complete things. What start in one place gets finished in another, and it just seemed so beautiful to me. And so that was my first book. And then I describe in this book how I took some pilgrimages to Ayodhya and then Vaishnadevi, and then Raghunath temple in Jammu. And suddenly I found myself back in Sita's time, hearing these conversations, living in the presence of Sita, living in Sita Loka, basically. And my heart totally opened to that. And I recognized that, I always felt Narayani was my Devi. I love Saraswati, I love Parvati, I love them all. But I had this old relationship with Narayani. And something opened at that moment where I felt that I had reconnected with her in a personal way. I had read Valmiki's Ramayana when I was in my 20s, and I knew that Ram and Sita were my devas, but it wasn't personal. There wasn't that personal connection. And I always sort of discounted the last part of Sita's being sent away. That just didn't make sense to me. It was later I discovered that those were added at another time. That's not part of the original narrative. But it wasn't until I started writing that this opened, where I found myself in Sita's presence, and it's been that way ever since. That's why I say that these devas are living beings, living presences, and everyone has a different history, a different personal relationship. So, and yet everyone does have guides. There's no question about it. Everyone has guides. Everyone has a relationship with some of these divine beings. Everyone has a long history. And when we leave this earth, we go into those realms. And then we come back and we forget it all. So everyone has those relationships. But in order to carry on one's life, a veil comes down. And for some reason, my veil didn't totally close when I was born. Next life it might close. But I think it was for the purpose of sharing these stories, because I think that in terms of human evolution, if more and more people really remembered that that we are eternal beings that just keep coming back to serve and to work through relationships, that would change a lot of things. It would also help people overcome the fear of death, which so many people have, even if it's not expressed. But I think that, and this is where this conference we did on spirituality and science, I think science will come to the point where they see, aha, consciousness creates matter. It's not that matter creates consciousness. Therefore, consciousness doesn't die. You move into another dimension. Science will realize that there are other dimensions and that we live in multi-dimensions. I mean, because actually, the soul is omnipresent. We're omnipresent, which means that we can be in many places at once. But we confine our consciousness when we take birth. We limit ourselves. We place limitations on ourselves. And so we're not aware of our full nature. And awakening is just becoming more and more aware, living more and more in that realization of our true nature, which is omnipresent. And in some of my other books, in the Bright Moon Rises, which I read from yesterday, I talk about my time between lives, because the book begins in the Vedic era, and then there's a time in the celestial world, and then another incarnation in Tang, China, where a lot of the things that began in the Vedic era are fulfilled. A love relationship that couldn't be fulfilled at the Vedic time is fulfilled later at that time. And so, and I mean, these writings have made me real. Thousands of years are nothing. It's the wink of an eye. And so I hope to do more writing about the celestial world so that it can become more real for people. I mean, there are many celestial worlds. It's not one. I mean, the astral world is bigger than the physical universe. And so there are many places that one can go. But I think we need to make that real. Real. We need to know that it's real and that we live there as well. We're not just earth beings. We live there as well. We're timeless. We have past, we have future. We can go in either way. And then we have to also be conscious of the present, because that's the work we have to do at the moment. But then being aware of the bigger picture.
I just want to just add that I so appreciate this the memory of the bones. In the Daggara tradition, they say to remember, and your remembering not only the past but now the future is just so important for us, for our evolution. So thank you for the siddhi, and yes.
Hi. It's interesting because my heart is beating really fast as I'm going to ask this question, because it touches me very personally. So now that we're talking about children and remembering past lives, I'm a serious meditator as well, and I go into these Vipassana retreats, where you're meditating for 16 hours, a day, and I'm able to remember snippets of past lives. And I see clearly your purpose of remembering snippets of your life, because you're putting this into books. But like speaking about children, I remember in a past life how my daughter murdered me.
You don't know what?
Murdered me, and we have a very troubled relationship. So I'm just wondering, and there's other snippets of other lives. It seems like the remembrance comes with a sense of purpose. In a way, it's not like I'm watching TV. Or that I'm able to remember just for the sake of just remembering, but because it's important for me to remember. How, what to make up with that? I like the idea of you not only, what you said, moving to the past, but also moving forward to the future, and maybe, visualizing how the relationship with her will be healed and come to a beautiful completion, or I don't know. I'm just wondering if you have any comment on, because I clearly see your purpose, putting all these beautiful stories to the world, and you touch me because I don't feel that crazy because I remember, But when it comes to little things like this, like, your daughter murdering you in a past life, what do you do with that?
I'm glad that you brought that up, because actually a book that I've just finished, which takes place in 12th century Tibet and then 13th century India, a relationship with a troubled son is resolved. That had begun hundreds of years earlier, a relationship with a troubled son. And in that life in Tibet, this son takes his revenge on me. Of course, I don't have the memory of it. So it's like, why is this being taking his revenge on me? Well, I had abandoned him in an earlier life. And that all gets resolved, but it doesn't get resolved with a lot of deep work. But it does get resolved. And I'm going to read this afternoon a story from the Rukmini book where some things that started in Sita's life get resolved. And a woman who's raped during Sita's time, how she makes peace with her rapist in the Rukmini book. And that's the way it is. I mean, we have to face our enemies. How are we going to move on if we don't make peace with everyone? And so you have an opportunity to manifest unconditional love with the one who murdered you.
It seemed very
Perfect, because
ironical
it's your child now.
because it seemed very ironical as soon as I come out of my meditation. It's like, oh my God, she took away my life, and now I'm here giving her life. So it was like that irony and that sensation inside my body of unfairness and how am I giving her life when she took away mine? You know, so probably deep inside of my being, there is that feeling in an unconscious level towards her, and you know, creates energetically a troubled relationship.
You know, I was at this conference I just came from in Oroville on spirituality and science. We were talking about some scars, how to heal some scars. And I recounted one of my own stories, which was that in my book, My Journey Through Time, I talk about a life in Varanasi in the 17th century. And I mentioned that there was communal violence, and my husband and I had to leave. We were Hindu. And I'd go on about that life, but I didn't remember why we had to leave. And then some years ago, I was taking my son and his family to India, and they wanted to go to see the Ajanta caves. And I read that we had to fly into Aurangabad. Suddenly, I remembered why I had to flee Varanasi. It was the destruction of the Vishwanath temple, Kashi Vishwanath temple. Aurangzeb destroyed that sacred place. And I was filled with pain and rage again. I was walking around with this just a few years ago. I mean, what do you do when you're walking around with rage towards somebody who died 300 years ago? Well, I decided to do something. I decided to go to his grave, and I had a plan. I was going to do something at the grave. And I found the hotel and the flights, and I was going to go do this because I was walking around with this pain. And I had a conversation, you know, Dina, you could get arrested by doing that at the grave, and that won't look very good for the Global Peace Initiative of Women. I was going to do it anyhow. And before I actually embarked on the trip, I had a dream. And in the dream, things get worked out in dreams as well. And in the dream, I was standing before the ruins of a temple. And someone came up to me and said, why don't you go greet this old Sufi who's sitting up there? So I walked across the ruins and the broken stones and everything. And in the corner, I find this old man crouched down, dressed in rags, a pitiful sight. And compassion for him awakened in me. And I greeted him. And he looked up at me, and I said to myself, I said out, oh my God, that's Aurangzeb. And I woke up. And I was filled with love, not love for him, but love for the one who to me it was Ram, who gave me the opportunity to meet him on the inner plane and to see that my anger was not needed. Justice is served. Things get your daughter who murdered you, justice was served in some way. Now is the time for healing. Now is the time for your healing. And you know, since that time, it dissolved my anger. You know, I still think that the correct history should be told. I mean, there's still a university and a town named after him. That's not right. But it's no longer my personal hurt. That got resolved. And I think that all of us have moments like that, which we may not connect all the dots, but we have moments when healing takes place. It can happen through dreams. It can happen just through a meeting. It's beautiful that that person was born to you as a daughter because you naturally love a child. And so in this life, that healing can take place.
Thank you.
I actually have 3 questions, so you can choose one if it's too much. My first question is the difference between past lives and ancestral,
And what?
and like ancestors and like an ancestry, because I know that comes up a lot for me, carrying a lot of things from my ancestry and my lineage, as well, and that does connect with the emotions that come up when I have those visions as well.
Okay, so the second one about ancestral healing, you choose to take birth in a family for a particular reason. So if your karma sort of connects with the karma of that ancestry, you take birth there. And so you have that shared history. Some people don't have a lot of connect. I mean, you can be born into a family for several reasons. Sometimes it's because you have that shared history, but sometimes it's for other reasons. The opportunities that that family might, for example, I was born into a secular Jewish family in the U.S. In my previous birth, I was born in Russia and then ended up in Europe during the war. I wasn't Jewish, but I had a Jewish lover who was taken to the camps. And so I witnessed what was going on there, even though it wasn't my own personal story. I was part of it. And I ended up dying in Europe. I met Yogananda, my guru. He was on the way back, and we had that one connecting moment. And then I was born in America into a Jewish family because I had a history. I mean, the family I was born into, they lost people in the Holocaust. But I was born into that family because I had some experience of that Holocaust, being in Europe at that time. But also, it was a secular family. It was sort of a clean slate. And I was able to find my guru, Yogananda, even though I couldn't meet him in this life. I had met him in my past birth, and begin very early on to continue. So I had some connection with that ancestral history of my family, but it was not I didn't carry that pain around. I didn't carry that pain with me, really. It was more that the conditions they offered me to begin my practice very early, because I wasn't burdened. I know so many people who came with Christian background who were burdened with this concept of original sin and all that, hell and all that. I didn't have any of that when I was born. It was sort of like a clean slate, because it was a secular family. And so I was spared a lot of that. And so I think for each person it's different. But if you are burdened with your ancestral pain, the burden of your past, there's some reason, there's some work for you to do with that. You may have had previous incarnations connected with that have not been healed. And you're given the opportunity in this life now to heal that. I mean, we should use this life really to take advantage of the opportunities given to us. In every birth, new opportunities are given. And so to see what work you can do, what you can clear away, what you can free yourself from, because it's really a matter of freeing ourselves from these imprints from the past, some scars. And so to use this birth, as best we can to free ourselves from things that we don't want to carry, that are not useful, that are not helpful in our journey.
The last question was, we were talking about unconditional love with healing with others. And I was wondering if you had anything to share about unconditional love for ourselves.
It begins with yourself, and it begins in a way of forgiving yourself, for things that you're not happy that you did. I mean, we all have things in our, not just our past, but in this life where we've behaved in a way that we wish we had been more conscious. And it's just forgiving yourself for all of that. And each day we begin anew, and we can, through love, carry ourselves into a different place where eventually we don't do things that we regret, that we wish we had done differently. I mean, that's the goal, is to behave in a way that's aligned with who we want to be. I mean, we're in the process of becoming who we want to be. And when I talk about the future, as I project myself in the future, it's like, okay, who do I want to be in that future? What do I want to manifest in that future? Who do I want to be? And we're in the process of becoming that, whether it takes the next life or the life after that or the life after that. We want to come closer to the one we want to be.
I'm in a deep inner process, so maybe my outer expression will not be as clear as I would like it to be. But I guess what I wanted to say is, I feel like it's just the veil of mystery that makes us all really charmed by the idea of past lives. And if it wasn't for the veil, then it wouldn't be a mystery and it wouldn't be so appealing. So can we just assume, although it is so lovely to hear about the past lives, and I certainly am very enthralled by them, but can we just, because many people here do not remember their past lives, So can we just simply assume that whatever's presenting itself to me in this present moment is the fruit of my past actions, and be the hero of my own journey, that to meet things with courage and be victorious in the attitude of, you know, how we meet what comes up, and look at the map of our lives and like the knots and blocks, and to be honest, the most challenging aspect of our lives, and say, you know what, like you said, it's going to come back and bite me later if I don't deal with it now. So just be really heroic and meet it in the way we can. And then the other question is like, what are all these roles anyway? Because it's all consciousness taking forms, you know, for this divine play. So can we just say that regardless of who raped who or murdered who and whatnot, and who is who in the family, the simplicity that love is all there is, and to meet what comes to us with love, can it just be so simple? Like,
It is simple. We make it complicated. And I always say to people, unless something arises organically, don't dig into the past. I mean, there's no purpose in doing that. You know, I mean, sometimes when I have memories, I mean, it's like I don't welcome them. I don't not welcome them. What is, right? But sometimes I say, oh, here we go again. You know, I'm back in another. And for me, it's just for the purpose of sharing and writing. I mean, there's nothing I need to know, because everything presents itself. What you need to work on presents itself to you. But we can become more mindful and not go through life just reactively, but to become more mindful of what's presenting itself. It's like, aha, I have to pay attention to that. I mean, there came a point, I'm just using my own example with my mother, where she was really getting old, and I said to myself, you got to pay attention to this now. I actually took care of her in the last years, and it was a beautiful last few years that we had together. And she had, you know, had even then would say hurtful things for me, but I would just look at it as her eccentricity, and I began to really enjoy her eccentricities without judging them in any way. And so, but I could have not. I have another sister who was just couldn't forgive her, and you know, okay, that will have to be worked out at some point in the future. But if we become more mindful and attend to the things that we know we have to attend to, it's as simple as that. You don't need to know anything from the past. You don't need to. But it is helpful to think about your future, because we can create the future that we want. And so, and that makes it more sort of urgent to tend to the things now. You know, I often say to my friends as they're getting older, you couldn't fulfill this in this life. How do you see yourself fulfilling it in the future? And so many of them have thought about it and said, aha, yeah, this is what I'd like to do. I couldn't do that in this life. I mean, there comes a time when you sort of shift from working out your past to beginning to create the imprints for your future. You're creating the blueprint, so to speak. And and that in part is coming in touch with our true nature, knowing ourselves to be the creator of our conditions. And then you stop, you know, when you know yourself to be the creator, you stop blaming. You know, I heard one of the Buddhist teachers that we brought to this conference in Oroville. He was new to us, and I was listening to some of his talks. In one of his talks, he said, practitioners come up and say, how do I know if I'm progressing in my practice? And he said, when you meet a challenging situation, as long as you're blaming the external world, you know you have more work to do. That really stayed with me. I think that's a good guide. As long as we're blaming outer conditions and not taking responsibility, then we know we have more work to do.
So the question I will ask, if I may, this attitude comes with some amount of life and experience and age, right? So can you speak to how, as we are growing up, that there is something about age and experience that, you know, when we are young, we're still very, you know, wanting this and wanting that, and, you know, judging this and judging that, and then it just comes with some sort of humility or acceptance of reality. What does age have to do with it, if at all?
Well, you gain a different perspective on life as you go through life. And in your early life, you're working out a lot of a lot of things, relationships, you're working at relationships. I mean, I look back and I feel that I've worked out relationships from several different lives, samskara from several different lives, many different lives actually. Things have been cleared. And you get to a certain point where you can say, what do I want now? There's nothing that I want. It's not like I have an ambition to become somebody. You want realization. You want to be in that state of love all the time. The state, when I talk about Sita's presence, the love that I feel from her being is beyond description. It's almost beyond what the human heart can hold. It's that state of love that we want to be in. And love, I mean, a lot of my writing now, especially in this new book that I'm doing, is about becoming love. Love is not an emotion. It's not like, oh, I love this person, and then of course you can come to hate that person if that person doesn't treat you well, if the person betrays you. That's not love. That's an emotional attachment. And to distinguish between, and I think that's one of the hardest things as human beings, is that we call what we call emotional attachments, we call that love. A lot of those emotional attachments are karmic. But what is it to be in a state of love? That's what we feel from the great ones, that they are in this, they are, I mean, that's the foundation of the universe. Love keeps everything together, keeps everything going. So that's really what we want. And earlier in our life, we're seeking it in different ways. Oh, if I can have this, I'll be happy. If I can have that, I'll be happy. You get that and you're not happy. You get that and you're not happy. You get the love of your life, and after a while it becomes, so what, you know? So and that's why I think it's important to keep ourselves, what you said about being in tune with whichever of the higher beings you're connected to, whichever one it is, to try to stay in tune with that energy, because then you get to experience that higher state of love.
I'd like to just get back to the book. It really touched me when you said that she was in this really deep state of meditation. Nobody could reach her. It had gone on for almost, I don't know, more than 24 hours or something. But yet when she came out of it, I mean, she was in that space. She must be like, she didn't exist. I mean, she was somewhere. But when she came back, almost immediately, she was there. She did what she had to do. She had to tend to, to the food, to her maid. I mean, I don't even know if she saw them as beings, but just as, I don't know, energy. She did what she had to do. And that she could do it without, because I know when I go in meditation, that sometimes when you're pulled out of it, somebody asks you something, it's like they're pulling you. There's so much resistance in me of coming back to this world. And it really touched me that she could just do it it was so beautiful. It was just like taking a step out and she's there. And she did it with her full heart. And that, I feel that's something that's going to really stay with me and teach me, that's how it should be done.
It's how it should be.
Yeah. Otherwise, the meditation is of no point, actually. Thank you.
So I wanted to read, all of you know the story from the Ramayana of Lady Ahilya? Yeah, okay. I wanted to read that story, actually, because that is, again, a story about changing the narrative around women. I'll just read that section. Okay, Mata is living in the forest with her children, and there's a whole narrative around why she's doing that, but I won't go into that. Mata continued to tell stories to the children over the years of their growing up. One night, they asked her to tell the story of Lady Ahilya and sage Gautama. How do you know about them? She inquired. She had never told them that story, thinking they were not old enough to understand. Kush replied that one of the boys at the hermitage had said that sage Gautama had cursed his wife for being unfaithful to him, and this was a lesson for all women. What does that mean, Ma? Asked Kush. Mata was quiet, and I suspect she was debating whether to speak to them of that matter. In the end, she decided to tell the story. I will tell the story of what happened because I knew them, she began. When I was a child, the son of Sage Gautama and Sage Ahilya was our family priest. I was fond of him, but there was a sadness about him that I couldn't penetrate. Whenever I asked him why he was sad, he replied that there had been a family tragedy many years ago that had never been resolved. I went to my father and asked what could be done, but Pitaji just shook his head and said, "We must wait until the right moment." Nobody would tell me what that tragedy was. The story, as it is told in the tradition, is that Lady Ahilya was so beautiful that Lord Indra wanted to seduce her. He came disguised as her husband and went into their cabin while her husband was down meditating. The husband came back, Sage Gautama, saw Indra walking out of the cabin, disguised as him, and was sure his wife had been unfaithful. And so he cursed his wife, and she became a stone. And then Ram came years later and released her from that. That's the story that is told. Now I'll tell you the other story. Then one day I met Sage Gautama. He was among the many sages who came to speak with my father. With my father, your grandfather, Sita saying to her children. I saw the same sadness in him as in his son, and so approached him. He replied that he had once committed a terrible deed and was suffering the consequences. So I went to my father and asked him, Sage Gautama is so wise, how could he have committed a terrible deed? Pitaji replied that no one knew for sure what had happened, as Sage Gautama refused to talk about it. But it was said that Gautama's wisdom and his wife's beauty was so great that even Indradev envied the couple. Out of jealousy, Indra came to Sage Ahilya in the guise of her husband when Sage Gautama was away and caused her to be unfaithful. She thought he was truly her husband. When Sage Gautama returned and saw what had happened, he cursed her. She became like a stone. She remained like that for a long time. This is what my father explained to me. Is that the story you have heard? Sita asked her children. They nodded. Then I will explain what truly happened. I did not believe that Indradev could deceive such a pure and knowledgeable woman as Sage Ahilya. I cried about this and finally determined that I would approach Indradev himself and ask him, and so I did. You saw Indradev? Asked Kush in amazement. Mata nodded. You went to Swargloka, Mata? I asked. This is the servant. This is Soma asking, astonished as she had never told me this story. She nodded and replied, Indeed, I did. It was before you arrived at the household, Soma. It was in a dream. One night I found myself in Swargaloka, one of the celestial realms, standing before Indradev. He looked at me lovingly and said, Child, ask your question. You may ask of me anything you wish. Why did you deceive Sage Ahilya? I asked with tears streaming down my face. He replied, It is the role of the Devas and Devis to test all the sages, to help bring out whatever imperfection remains. This is necessary before they are permitted to enter the heavenly realm. So I took the guise of her husband and went to Sage Ahilya to test her powers of perception. As soon as I entered the cottage, she saw through my disguise and challenged me, Indradev, why have you come in the guise of my husband? I told her that I had come only to test her perception to see whether she could perceive the truth, and I took my leave. Just then, Sage Gautama was returning from his meditation. He saw me leave his cottage, still disguised as him, and assumed his wife had misbehaved with me. A great anger arose in him. He started to curse me, but Sage Ahilya ran out to prevent this deed, which would have had terrible consequences for the natural world. She stood between her husband and me and received the curse herself. She immediately turned into a stone-like form, silent as a boulder. Indra went on to say, I turned to him and said with great sorrow, See, great sage, what your anger has wrought on an innocent woman who has done no wrong. I only came to test you both. Sage Ahelia saw through my disguise and did not err, but you were not free from your anger and doubt. Then I gave Sage Ahelia the choice of coming with me to Sawargaloka or remaining in that stone-like body until her husband freed himself of anger. She chose to remain so that they could enter the celestial realm together. Is there no remedy for this? I asked Indradev in a pleading voice. A remedy will come very soon, my dear. I awoke after hearing those words, and my heart was at peace. Mata fell silent and glanced over at Luv and Kush, those were her two sons, who were looking at her in amazement. After a few minutes, she asked them what they had learned from this story. Kush replied that anger was the cause of so much suffering. One must conquer anger. She nodded and turned to Luv. He was quiet for a long time. She pressed him. What else is there to learn, Luv? Finally, he replied, Sage Gautama did not trust his wife. Sage Ahelia, even though she was a great lady, that was his true fault. Mata said, you both are right. Without trust, there is no love. Without love, there's no goodness, no dharma. Love is the basis of all. Sage Ahelia knew that if Indradev received the curse, the whole of the natural world would be disturbed. Without even considering herself, she intervened out of love for the world, and then she chose to remain in that stone-like form out of love for her husband. Sage Gautama had great knowledge, but Sage Ahelia had great love. Knowledge without love is not wisdom. That's not how the story is told today. But that's the version of the story. And again, you see in the narrative, she's the victim. She betrayed her husband, and so he cursed her. But she is the greater one because she took the curse upon herself to spare the natural world. I think again and again, the message from Sita is the message of love. Knowledge without love is not wisdom. And that's what we have to bring to the world. I see those who spout, who are in high positions and spout knowledge without love,